The Bell family never expected the quiet Tennessee woods to hide a presence. One night, John heard deliberate knocks from the trees, soft but insistent. By morning, faint raps echoed through the house. Cups slid across tables, chairs tipped without reason, and whispers called Betsy's name. Each sound grew sharper, colder, and purposeful. The family realized quickly something or someone was in the house, and it wasn't human. The Bell farm had always been quiet. Nestled deep in the woods of Adams, Tennessee, the small homestead had seen decades pass in relative peace. The family lived simply. John Bell, the father, was a stern but fair man who worked the land, while his wife and children tended the house and farm animals. Life was routine, predictable and safe, until the night everything changed. It started subtly, almost imperceptibly. One evening, John Bell was walking along the edge of the property, inspecting the fences before dusk. The sun had dipped behind the hills, and the air smelled of wet earth and the fading warmth of late summer. He paused when he heard it. A faint knock, coming from the trees near the woods. At first he thought it was an animal, a branch falling, a raccoon or fox moving through the underbrush. But the knocking repeated, soft and deliberate. 1, 2, 3. Steady taps that didn't match any sound he had heard before. John called out, "Hello?" His voice carried through the fading light, but there was no response. The knocking stopped. He shrugged it off and continued his inspection, though a small unease had begun to grow in the back of his mind. The next morning, things became harder to ignore. While the family ate breakfast, faint knocks echoed from inside the house. At first they were subtle, light raps against the walls and ceiling, but unmistakably there. The children paused mid-bite, glancing around. The sound seemed almost purposeful. John moved through the house, checking every room. Nothing was out of place. There was no draft, no loose boards, no animal in the attic. The evening brought a second, louder round of knocking. This time, it came from the floor above. John's daughter Betsy woke suddenly, convinced she had heard someone pacing. She ran to her father's side. "Pa," she said, "there's someone upstairs." John tried to calm her. He insisted that it was the wind, that the house was old and made noises. He checked again, floorboards creaking under his feet, doors still locked. Nothing. Still, the unease lingered. Something was not right. By the third night, small objects began to move on their own. Cups slid slightly across tables. Chairs tipped without explanation. The children grew frightened, whispering to one another about invisible hands. John tried to maintain reason. Perhaps it was an animal, perhaps a gust of wind. But when Betsy went to fetch water from the well, she swore she heard a voice calling her name. She ran back to the house, only to find a chair had been thrown across the room. The family attempted to ignore it, hoping it was temporary. But the presence persisted. Every day, the sounds grew more precise, more directed. At night, they seemed to follow them through the house, settling near the children's rooms, knocking softly at the windows, tracing the walls with invisible fingers. One evening, John sat in the parlor, exhausted from a day of tending the fields, when the knocks became words. At first, they were whispers, too faint to understand. Then, unmistakably, "You'll regret it." John froze. The words weren't carried by wind or any echo of the house. They came from the walls themselves, the air around him. They weren't coming from anywhere he could see. The parlor was empty. His wife, Martha, gasped from the doorway. The children clung to each other, pale and silent. The voice grew bolder over the next few nights. It spoke directly to Betsy. Her name, warnings, threats, questions about things she had never spoken aloud. John tried to intervene, tried to confront whatever was in the house. He called for neighbors, friends, anyone willing to help. They heard the knocks, they felt the cold air, sometimes even felt hands brush against their skin, but no one ever saw anything. By the end of the week, the Bell family's life had changed completely. Sleep was fleeting, meals were tense, and the house felt alive. Something or someone was among them, something that did not belong. The next morning, the house felt heavier than before. Sunlight streamed through the windows, but it did nothing to lighten the strange tension lingering in the rooms. The Bell family went about their routine as usual, but even small noises made them jump. The faint tapping of the wind against the shutters now sounded deliberate. Someone, or something, was watching. It began in the kitchen. Martha Bell was preparing breakfast when a cup slid across the table on its own. She gasped and dropped the spoon she was holding. Her children froze. Betsy pointed toward the corner, wide-eyed. "It moved again," she whispered. John Bell stepped forward, trying to rationalize it. "It's probably the table," he said, brushing his hand against the wooden surface. "Maybe it's uneven. The cup just rolled." But the cup had not rolled. It had slid smoothly, stopping abruptly as if placed by an invisible hand. Later that afternoon, when John went to check the barn, he heard the unmistakable sound of footsteps above him. Slow, deliberate, pacing back and forth. The attic was empty. The animals were calm, almost unnaturally so. Yet the steps continued, moving across the roof beams and then disappearing. That night, the sounds returned with more intensity. It was around dusk when the first clear voice spoke. At first, it was a whisper, barely audible, like a breeze moving through a narrow crack in the wall. Betsy heard it first. "Betsy." She froze, staring at the corner of the room. The candlelight flickered. The shadows stretched along the walls. She could hear it clearly now. Her name, repeated in a calm but chilling tone. She ran to her mother, trembling. Martha tried to comfort her, but the fear in Betsy's eyes was contagious. John, already weary from the day's work, tried to maintain reason. "You're imagining it," he said, but even he could feel it. The room seemed colder, the air heavier, a presence pressing just beyond vision. By the third night, the activity had grown impossible to ignore. Objects began moving with force. Chairs toppled. Dishes slid off counters. A jug of water tipped over without anyone touching it. Betsy was hit several times, lightly at first, by invisible slaps. Then, scratches appeared on her arms, shallow but undeniable. She cried out, and John rushed in, only to find the room empty. The children clung to him, shaking. Neighbors began to notice the activity. One man, coming to deliver supplies, reported that he had felt a cold hand on his shoulder and heard a, "Leave now, or worse will come." John tried to deny it, but the neighbors looked pale and shaken. The Bell family realized that whatever this was, it was not limited to their imagination. It was around this time that the spirit, or whatever haunted the house, began to communicate more clearly. It no longer relied only on movement or sound. It spoke. "You will not stop me," the voice said one evening, echoing from the walls. Betsy's hair stood on end. "Why are you here?" she asked, her voice barely audible. The reply came from all directions. "To watch, to test, to punish." John tried to protect his family. He attempted to strike at the shadows, to drive the presence away with shouts and prayers, but the attacks only became stronger. The knocks, slaps, and scratches intensified. Objects flew through the air more violently. It became clear that the Bell Witch, as the family began calling it, had a particular focus: Betsy. The girl became the center of most of the activity. The spirit mocked her, called her by name, and sometimes whispered secrets she had never shared with anyone. Days passed, and sleep became nearly impossible. Each night the haunting grew bolder. Betsy would awaken to feel hands on her shoulders, whispers in her ear, and cold spots surrounding her bed. Sometimes she would wake to find objects stacked carefully around her, as if the spirit was taunting her with impossible precision. John and Martha did their best to maintain calm during the day, but every creak of the floorboards, every sudden gust of wind sent waves of fear through the household. Neighbors started visiting more often. Some came to witness the events, others out of curiosity, but all left unsettled. Every person who stepped inside the house felt the cold, oppressive presence. Some reported seeing shadows move across the walls. Some claimed they felt invisible hands push or pull at them. By the end of the second week, the Bell family's home was no longer a place of comfort. It was a prison. The spirit followed them from room to room, waking them in the night, moving objects with deliberate force, whispering threats, and focusing its attention most keenly on Betsy. And though no one could see it clearly, everyone knew it was there, waiting, watching, growing stronger. The Bell Witch had fully arrived, and nothing the family could do seemed to stop it. By the beginning of the third week, the Bell family's home had become a place of constant unease. The knocks, scratches, and movement of objects no longer seemed random. They were deliberate, directed, purposeful. Every sound carried a meaning. Every shadow seemed to watch. The family had grown tired and wary. It was Betsy who felt it most. Every night she would awaken to find herself at the center of the spirit's attention. Sometimes it was gentle at first, a whisper in the corner, a soft brush of cold air along her cheek. But the whispers became words, and the words became threats. One evening, as the family sat quietly by the fire, a loud, deliberate knock echoed from the wall. Then another, and another. John rose and approached the source. "Who's there?" he demanded. The reply came, clearly, from all directions. "John Bell, you will pay for what you have done." The voice was deep, chilling, and filled with anger. John froze, unsure of what it could mean. The words were not random. They were directed at him. "Pay for what?" John asked, his voice shaking. The silence was immediate, almost suffocating. Then the voice came again, this time taunting, almost amused. "Do you not know, John? You have ignored me, mocked me, and yet I am here." Over the next few days, the haunting escalated further. Betsy began receiving messages at night, words whispered directly in her ear, sometimes describing things she had never told anyone. secrets, small personal thoughts, things only she knew. The spirit seemed to know everything about the family. One night, she awoke to find the sound of scraping nails across the walls, accompanied by a voice speaking clearly. "Betsy Bell, you cannot escape me. Neither can your father. Neither can your mother." Objects flew through the air as the words were spoken. Plates crashed to the floor. A chair tipped over. A lamp rolled across the room, narrowly missing John as he lunged to grab it. Neighbors began to take notice more frequently. Some came to see for themselves, driven by curiosity or concern. Each visitor reported the same: cold spots that followed them, whispers that seemed to know their names, and objects moving without explanation. One man, staying late one evening, swore he saw a shadow cross the room, a dark, human-shaped figure moving swiftly across the walls, then disappearing into thin air. He described feeling invisible hands clutching at his arms as if warning him to leave. John began to realize that whatever haunted them was intelligent, purposeful, and focused. It wasn't random, it was aware. The voice became more aggressive. "You cannot stay here," it said one night. "Leave or suffer." John tried to confront it. "What do you want from us?" The reply was chilling. "To torment, to warn, to punish." Sometimes, the spirit would mimic voices in the house, calling out the names of family members or neighbors. Sometimes it would mock them, repeating private words they had spoken only moments before. The family was trapped in a constant state of anxiety, unsure when it would strike next. Physical attacks continued alongside the verbal threats. Betsy would awaken with bruises, scratches, and marks across her arms and back. Plates, pots, and small furniture moved seemingly by themselves. Doors slammed without wind. Windows rattled when the air was still. It became impossible for the family to feel safe even during the day. The spirit seemed to follow them from room to room, pacing unseen, constantly. It was a presence that could not be ignored, growing stronger with each passing day. By the fourth week, the Bell family's home had become a place of fear, not just for them, but for the surrounding community. It started subtly. Neighbors passing by would notice strange sounds emanating from the house. At first, they thought it was just an old building creaking in the wind, but soon the phenomena became harder to explain. Knocking and scratching echoed through the walls. Doors opened and closed by themselves. Objects shifted when no one was near them. One afternoon, a neighbor named William came by to check on the Bells. As he stepped into the parlor, he froze. The air turned icy cold, though it was a warm spring day. A shadow moved across the far wall, impossibly fast. William raised his hand, ready to strike at whatever it was, but it vanished. Then a voice spoke, not a whisper, not from the wind, but clear and direct. "Leave now," it said. "This is not your place." William stumbled backward, pale and trembling. He hurried home, telling anyone who would listen to stay away from the Bell farm. The spirit's attacks grew more targeted, more aggressive. Betsy became the center of nearly all activity. One night, as she slept, she awoke to feel hands clutching her shoulders, pressing her down into the mattress. The temperature dropped sharply. She tried to scream, but no sound came out. The voice whispered in her ear, "You cannot escape me." When she finally bolted upright, she noticed objects surrounding her bed. Books, chairs, even a small stool, all arranged neatly, almost deliberately, as if the spirit was displaying its control over the room. Neighbors began visiting in greater numbers, some out of curiosity, others to witness the phenomenon firsthand. Many reported seeing objects move without contact. Some felt cold hands brush against their arms or shoulders. Others heard voices calling their names or whispering threats. One woman claimed to see a dark, humanoid figure pacing across the room, disappearing when she blinked. Even those who came with skepticism left unnerved, often pale and shaken. The spirit also began making predictions. One evening, it called out to John, saying, "You will fall, and the pain will come to those you love." Days later, one of the family's animals became ill, and neighbors swore that the events surrounding the Bell family seemed to follow the spirit's words. The ghost appeared to know not just about the household, but about things beyond it: secrets, events, small details that no outsider could know. Physical violence escalated. Betsy would awaken with bruises and scratches. Furniture flew across rooms. Heavy objects toppled without warning. Doors slammed shut on their own. Windows rattled even when the air was still. At one point, the family claimed that a large pot was hurled from the kitchen onto the floor, narrowly missing John. Despite their fear, the Bell family tried to maintain normal routines. They prayed, sought help from local ministers, and tried to shield Betsy as best they could. But the spirit was relentless. The community's fear grew. Word spread quickly, and more neighbors came to see the phenomena. Some attempted to confront the spirit, calling out or praying aloud. Many reported the same thing. The Bell Witch responded. Sometimes the voice insulted them directly. Sometimes objects moved in response to their words. The ghost seemed aware of every visitor, every movement, every intention. Some neighbors refused to return. Others continued to visit, drawn by curiosity or disbelief. Each visit only strengthened the legend that would grow around the Bell family and their haunted farm. By the 5th week, the Bell family had grown exhausted. Sleep was fleeting, meals were tense, and even daylight brought little comfort. The haunting had reached a point where it was impossible to ignore. Every creak, every shadow, every whisper made them jump. Betsy remained at the center of the activity. Each night, the spirit would visit her with whispers, slaps, and sometimes full-force attacks. Objects would fly through the air, doors slammed shut on their own, and unseen hands would clutch at her while she slept. One evening, John sat by the fire, exhausted and frustrated. He had tried reasoning, praying, confronting the spirit, but nothing worked. "You've tormented us long enough," he said aloud, his voice steady despite the fear in his chest. "Why are you doing this?" The house went silent. Then, a familiar voice, calm and cold, filled the room. "Because I can," it said. "Because I choose." The words sent a chill through John's body. Betsy shrank closer to her mother. The presence in the room felt heavier than ever, pressing down like a living weight. In the following days, the spirit began to speak in ways that went beyond simple threats. It predicted events, small at first, then larger. Neighbors who had been skeptical began to report that the Bell Witch had known things that no one could have possibly known: illnesses, accidents, the death of animals. One visitor even claimed the spirit warned them of a storm days before it arrived. Sometimes the ghost spoke of John himself. "You will fall," it whispered one night, "and none can save you." John, already weary, felt a growing dread. Though he tried to maintain courage, he began to notice subtle signs that the prophecy might come true. A weakness in his body he hadn't noticed, a heaviness in his chest, a lingering unease he could not shake. The attacks continued, escalating in intensity. Betsy woke to find herself pinned to her bed, invisible hands pressing her down. Objects flew across rooms, sometimes narrowly missing her parents. The spirit mocked her relentlessly. Personal secrets, repeating words she had only spoken in confidence. Even the neighbors who tried to intervene could not stop it. Doors slammed in their faces. Chairs tipped over. Cold spots followed them wherever they went. Every attempt to confront the spirit only reinforced its strength and presence. Eventually, the Bell Witch's visits became less frequent, but never entirely absent. The spirit seemed to withdraw gradually, as if satisfied that it had made its mark. Betsy was no longer physically attacked every night, but she could still feel its presence. Shadows moved where no one stood. cold spots lingered in certain corners of the house, and whispers occasionally returned. It had left a lasting impression on the Bell family. Sleep was never fully peaceful again, and the farm became known far and wide as a place of fear and mystery. Even after the spirit's most violent days ended, the legend persisted. Visitors still came, hoping to glimpse the unseen force. Stories spread to nearby towns and eventually across the country. People reported that the Bell Witch had cursed the land, leaving warnings and prophecies that some swore had come true. Betsy grew up with the memory of the spirit's relentless attention, and John and Martha carried the weight of what had transpired. The house, though still standing, felt different forever, its walls holding echoes of knocks, whispers, and unseen movements. The Bell Witch had left the family physically unharmed, for the most part, but the psychological and emotional toll was undeniable. And so the story spread, growing into legend. The spirit that haunted the Bell farm became one of the most famous hauntings in American history. Visitors still speak of the farm, the warnings, and the voice that could not be seen, but would not be forgotten.